And welcome to, good morning everyone. Welcome to our session on battling imposter syndrome, especially when starting university or work. I am Leanne Weaver from Beam Development and Training. I am an author, a trainer and a therapist. And one of the subjects that I train on the most is probably imposter syndrome. So it's a subject very close to my heart. I am delighted to be joined by Nita Kaur, who is Early Careers Lead at RSM UK. Nita has a background in early careers and talent acquisition and has worked with graduates for around 10 years, especially in terms of recruitment and training. We've also got Mike Jones from Acacium Group, who is the Organisational Development Manager for Acacium, and has worked for around 20 years in a range of public and private sector organisations. His previous roles include resourcing partner, resourcing manager, HRBP, and talent manager. And we've got Steve Minney from Swansea University, who is head of undergraduate recruitment at Swansea University. He's also an experienced school governor and is also the parent of a year 11 teen, so knows exactly what it is like right now when people are making these big choices. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to talk about this huge subject. From my experience of imposter syndrome and teaching on it, I know that imposter syndrome affects around 70% of us at some point in our lives. So it is something that most of us in this room are familiar with. But it's definitely something which we see on the increase in academia when we're making big changes in our life as well. So I'd like to open it up to the floor to ask really how you would define imposter syndrome. And I will come to Nita first of all, if that's okay.
Thank you, Leanne. So imposter syndrome is a study that was carried out, I think, in the 1970s, and it was mainly aimed at young women to sort of understand the fear of being discovered as a fraud, I think, is what was the, doubting their abilities, their skills, their talents, and most importantly, their accomplishments. So people, the study was aimed at sort of women who were in quite high profile jobs, but how they felt that they were not able to be their authentic self. And then they had to put on almost a persona to be able to be a part of that success that they were, but they didn't really feel that they were their true authentic self to be able to achieve what they did. And so there was two parts to this. So I think the first part is those who were downplaying their achievements, had a lot of self-doubt, almost becoming introverted, afraid of speaking up or afraid of being successful. And then of course you have the flip side of that. There was those who were trying to sort of strive for perfection, I would say, who didn't really ask for help, and also had a bit of a fear of failure. So this imposter syndrome almost had a personality of its own. And when people went into the workplace, they put on this persona because they couldn't find that happy medium of how to be successful, how to be able to be, assertive, and also to how to be their authentic self. So for me, imposter syndrome, yes, the study was for women, but I think the majority of it applies to everybody in the workplace. We all, at some point in our lives, have perhaps experienced a little bit of this imposter syndrome at some point, whether that was at the start of our careers as a young person, or perhaps when you've been promoted, when you've been successful in achieving. So I think somewhere along the lines, all of us in the working world have experienced that sort of imposter syndrome.
Absolutely, Nita, thank you. And I think subsequent research from that 1978 study has shown that it's seen in men and women on an equal number. It absolutely is seen in all walks of life. I think the thing that we can probably agree about imposter syndrome is it is far more likely to appear anytime we're out of our comfort zone and we feel underrepresented.
Yeah,
okay.
I'd probably contribute something on that, actually. I agree with everything Nita's just said there. It manifests in almost everybody at some point in their life, except maybe the very small number of people who have very little self-doubt, etc. psychologically. So there's something called the Big Five traits that measure essentially how your psyche is made up. and there's been lots and lots of studies done on this. And I think you're right. The incidence rate in men and women is about equal, but the studies I've seen that show that women seem to feel it more acutely than men when they get it to some degree, and that's on a population level rather than an individual one. But that's part of it. I think you're right that there is something. Well, there's two thoughts here, maybe three, and I'll try and unpack them a second. Number one is we reach a certain point in our lives, and it is all of a sudden socially and in a business context as well, unacceptable to fail. And if you think of when we've gone through our childhoods, etc., when we've been going through primary school, secondary school, etc., it is expected that you don't have all the answers, and you're learning as you go, and you will get some things wrong and correct them as you go along. And all of a sudden there's this belief that when you go into the working world, that stops and you must suddenly get everything right. Now, some businesses have that view, but most of the more sensible, mature ones accept that there is going to be a learning and adaptation period for people as they move into a new role. Our business calls it time to competence. So it's the time between when you go into a job and when you pretty much know what you're doing and are able to run independently. And for us, it's anywhere from, let's pick a simple role, let's call it administrator role for the sake of ease. That's anywhere from 18 to 26 weeks. So actually half a year for someone to become competent in a role. And even then, that's not the end point of the journey. So that's thought number one, that there's partly a cultural piece to be tackled about it suddenly being unacceptable to not know the answers or the rest of it. Whereas the reality is, I don't know all the answers now, and I've been doing what I do for about 20 years. And the second part is about, there is a healthy aspect to that sort of feeling of nervousness, of not quite knowing what you're doing, that imposter syndrome becomes a result of, in that it's a sort of a warning signal to you that you maybe don't know all the answers to something, and that's actually a healthy thing to recognize. Because if you think of it, turn the perception over a minute. What is that essentially telling you? That you're stretching, you're developing, you're growing in some way. That's what it's a warning light on, essentially. And sometimes it's not a realistic light, and then it's on when it shouldn't be, so to speak. To use the car analogy, the warning light is on the dashboard when there's nothing wrong. And sometimes it's on there because you need some help and support to reach the next level. Without getting all boring and HRy on you for a second, there's a concept called the zone of proximal development, which basically says with help and support, you can achieve more at any one time than you can without that help and support. So that's the other angle to it. It's actually an opportunity to grow, develop, stretch, provided you've got the right support there to help you do so.
I think that's such a great point, Mike. Thank you. Steve, let's come to you on the back of that. I love that idea that it's a sign of us growing.
Yeah, no, as I said, I completely agree with a lot of that. I mean, if we can apply this to education for a second, and say, obviously I work at a university, quite a long time ago now, I was a first generation entrant. So what that means is I was the first person in my immediate, actually for me, it was my extended family as well. I was the first of any of my grandparents, grandchildren to go to university. It was a really new experience. Obviously, there's a whole language you have to learn, but will I be able to, at school, well, there's no point being modest about it. I'd excelled. I had terrific grades, but no one had ever done what I was doing before, in my family before. There was no one to lean on and say, what will it be like? I have no idea. So it's a fairly rapid learning curve there. The growth has to be pretty quick. Basically, as soon as you arrive. A lot of this is about confidence. I think some of the things that Mike was just talking about, I think essentially we're talking about a level of stress. Basically, imposter syndrome is a manifestation of stress. There's a scientific explanation for that. You're put in a situation where you're out of your comfort zone, as said earlier, and chemical things start happening. Cortisol and adrenaline start whooshing around your body. You feel a bit sick. You feel short of breath. These are things that happen to all of us sometime every day, probably, and it never really goes away. I still have it today in different situations. and in different settings. How does this apply to education? Well, as I said, every year, a couple of 100,000 people start at university and they don't really know what to expect. It's very easy to feel like everyone else knows where you should be, what you should be doing, what's the learning style. You know, university will be different, you'll be cast adrift and it's independent learning and nothing but, none of that's true. But these are the feelings that take hold, and see, these are the stress reactions that I think many people get. It's particularly noticeable with the last couple of cohorts of entrance to university that these feelings are manifesting to an even greater degree. The pandemic is absolutely, definitely at the root of it all. The fact that we've had a couple of cohorts of students now who the entrance exams, what they consider the entrance exams to university, almost certainly are the first public exams they've ever sat, because they were teacher assessed grades, everyone got sent home 3 years ago next week. There were no exams for the next 2 years, basically. So that leads to people arriving at university with really strong grades, you know, with them having demonstrated amazing resilience to get through what we've all lived through over the last 3 years, which is still not over, because you know, the disruption we all experienced that began 3 years ago ripples on and will continue for quite a long time, I suspect. But people are arriving thinking, I'm not prepared. I'm not the person I would have been or who I expected to be 3 years ago, necessarily. And there's a huge adjustment required from that. Now, so, you know, I work at one university, which is probably fairly typical, I suspect, in that we've really tried to take account of that and change the way we teach, change what our expectations are of the confidence that people arrive with. Not necessarily, you know, none of this is to do with academic ability, but it's very simply mindset more than anything, I think. And I think that's a big part of what we're talking about. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but there's a lot to talk about. It feels like
I was just going to say, to add to that, I think what is success? What do we measure success? We're always measured by numbers. We're always measured by title. We're also measured by even salaries. And I think the biggest change that we've seen sort of post-COVID is that actually get to know yourself. Who are you? Who is your authentic self? Get to know what your capabilities are, your abilities are, and get to know what your interests are. And that's how you battle the imposter syndrome, because when you are led by other people telling you what you can do, what you can achieve, what you can be, who you can be, you're then limiting yourself. And as Steve said, it's a psychological sort of condition that we're in from a young age, from school. You're constantly told, well, that's, you know, what's personalities, what's skills, what's ability. It's a whole picture of you. And those are the elements that make up you as an individual. And when we go into certain workplaces, yes, we have to adapt. Now, there's a difference between adapting, and I think there's a difference between being conditioned to be a certain way. Now, those are the two different things that we need to separate. When you adapt, it's bringing your authentic self still into that workplace to say, well, actually, I can do that job. I can be a part of this team. I can do that, but I can do it being me. As opposed to, I need to put on a front, I need to put on a persona, be somebody else to be accepted.
And
I think in education, you know, we go into different schools.
Sorry, Nita, you froze a little bit there.
Oh, sorry, it's my internet. Am I back now? Yeah, so just my experience with some young people that I've worked with, my advice to everybody has been, first get to know what it is that you want to do. And as Mike picked up earlier, failure is deemed as something so terrible that you're not good at something or you failed at something. Actually, it's telling you something that about you that's perhaps not your forte, that's perhaps not the area that you need to go into. It's not because you failed or you've done bad or you've done wrong. It just means that your interest is not perhaps there. And why don't you look at something else? And in fact, use that opportunity to make it better, as opposed to thinking to myself, oh, I failed, I haven't done very well. Well, what's success? And I think one of the other things about the imposter syndrome is that the adverse of that is that you strive for that perfection. Everything's got to be perfect. Everything's got to be brilliant. By whose measure? By your own or by other people's measure? And if you are striving for that perfection, you'll never achieve it, because you'll constantly set the bar so high for yourself all the time. Once you've achieved one milestone, then you want to achieve another. Don't set yourself up for anything. Now, I think there's been a flip and a change in like setting goals and setting targets, and people are really fixed, right, by the next 5 years, I'm going to have this, I'm going to have that. Don't be fixated on it. be flexible with it, because why? It's an experience that you need to have in order for you to grow as an individual. You need to be able to not be so fixed and have that as a goal, have a plan. You know, people have 5-year plans, have a 5-year plan and see where it takes you and work towards it. If there's something that comes in the way, that's a challenge. That's life telling you that perhaps you need to look at, you know, what other things that you're capable of doing. But we're so ingrained in our young people that you have to be successful and this is how it's measured, and you have to go for this number and you have to go for this letter and you have to get this. Just try and be who you are, enjoy what you're doing, and if you really want to be successful, put your time and effort into doing that. That brings you joy, but making sure that you're doing it, that it's not to be successful in the measurement side of it, but it's to be successful in how much you have been able to bring out those skills and abilities in yourself, I think is the most important part. Whether that's doing a degree at university, whether that's going into a job, whether that's going into anything in society that you feel that you can be a participant in, but just to make sure that when you go in, that you are aware of yourself and be aware of others. Because I think sometimes we can get so fixated on what we want and we strive for that perfection that we seem to sometimes forget the impact that we can have on other people, in our team, in our society, and wherever it is. So we have to have a balance of the two. And that's where you can, I think then you can break down this imposter syndrome, because then you feel so like, I've got another personality I need to, you know, give attention to. When I put that hat on to go to work, I am that person. No, it's to say that you are who you are so that you can grow and develop as an individual, being that authentic person, to be able for your team to see what you're capable of. Well, what is that person capable of doing and what are they capable of achieving? And that way you get the right training and support. If you push yourself too much and put on the imposter syndrome where you are people pleasing almost, then it's hard to see what your skills and abilities are for you to then to be developed and trained further. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes,
if
thank
I could
you,
build on something
Nita.
Nita said there, actually, there's an interesting thought there, and I agree with all that. There's a slightly different take I'd have on the end of that. I think you're absolutely right. You shouldn't be pretending to be someone you're not.
Yeah.
If you are having to do that consistently to a large degree, you are probably in a job that is not suited to you, in all honesty. Realistically, though, without going right down the psychology rabbit hole a second, there's traits we all have, and by a certain point in life, they become relatively consistent, and that's how we sort of become formative adults from being children. Originally, we develop and we reach a semi-constant state with that. I'll give you an example from my background. You may not know it from the description you had there, but I actually started out life as a computer geek. I did a degree that was highly technical in computers. It has absolutely nothing to do with what I've done professionally. I have never used it once in any way, professionally speaking. I went from doing that into being a headhunter, which was completely different, and again, out of my comfort zone. I went from that into building teams in businesses that hire people in, essentially to help the business, similar to what Nita's described herself doing. I went from that into the HR side of things again, and then from that into what is now organizational development, which is basically how you change the internal mechanisms within a business to make it operate differently, better, help the people more, all the rest of it. So there is a piece there about it's okay to be slightly different in your professional life to your personal life, because we all do that instinctively, right? With our family, our spouse, our sibling, our friends, we're all slightly different versions of ourselves. Then that's okay. But if you happen to be someone fundamentally different, that job probably doesn't fit you, psychologically speaking. And I'll give you an example. One of the jobs I worked in previously required a really, really high attention to detail. I am not a detail person. I'm very much a 10,000-foot view naturally. I like the overview and looking at the broad picture. So a job that pulls me into the detail constantly is very, very stressful for me. It means I'm having to reshape how I think and how I operate and how I talk to people in a way that's not sustainable. You know, I used to come home from that job exhausted mentally at the end of the week because I was having to be someone I essentially wasn't in any way and was having to pull a mask on. So some difference and some defamation is okay, but it's when it becomes a very large amount, that's where you start to, and I think that's where imposter syndrome creeps in even more, where you are manifesting that stress highly and it's not really what you feel you are good at. So that's partly one piece of the careers advice I'd give there to avoid imposter syndrome. Understand what you are good at, what you enjoy, what you naturally are energized by doing, and try and find a job that involves more of that, and you're less likely to suffer with imposter syndrome. You'll never find a role that's perfect. There are always bits to every job that, I'm sure the other panelists will echo this, that they would rather not do, but it's, if it's 80%, 75% right, that's probably a good indicator it's a good fit. One more thought just on the, excuse the pinging noise, sorry, that's my other message going off in the background. Just on the imposter syndrome piece. We all innately know from watching sports people, right? We've all watched the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games, boxing, whatever your favorite thing is, F1, that there is a learning mechanism attached to either failure or not knowing something. The best, let's pick Formula One that's been on recently, right? The Formula One drivers did not start out winning every race. They lost again and again and again. And they probably suffered with that imposter syndrome at some point. Is this right for me? Am I doing okay? But at some point, success kicks in and they're suddenly one of the top drivers in the world or on the circuit. So even if you are feeling like there is a, I'm not succeeding, I'm concerned about the fact I'm not succeeding, understand that if you persist in it, at some point, success will arrive. And it's, again, about finding a business and an environment that is willing to support that learning curve and that change. That's partly why, for example, you have graduate programs and apprenticeship programs, because it's understood that you're going to come in not knowing everything, and there is a degree of learning and adaptation to that workplace.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Mike. Thank you so much. And on the back of what you've just kind of started at the end there, I guess I'll open up to you all to ask that, as a young person, if you find yourself, whether it's a new role at work, going out into the work environment, or going to university, and you feel totally out of your depth, you feel out of your comfort zone, you feel like everyone else knows what they're doing and you're the only person that doesn't have a clue. If I can kind of push you to give perhaps your number one tip to manage that, and I'll come to Steve first of all. Sorry, Steve, totally putting you on the spot there. What would be your number one tip if you come to university, because that's your background, and you feel so out of your depth? How can you help someone?
Share those feelings, verbalize them. I think that's the initial first step. It's the most natural thing is to become even more introverted and insular about it. But when you tell people and connect, one of the main benefits of entering higher education is you massively, if you allow yourself to, you massively expand your social circle. So you'll meet huge numbers of new people. And when you share that kind of vulnerability, it turns out you probably meet people feeling exactly the same. And together you'll be stronger.
Absolutely. I love that. Together you'll be stronger. And I guess the lie, if you like, that imposter syndrome tells us is we're going to be caught out. So if we start telling people we can't be caught out anymore, because we're kind of catching it on the other side, right? Thank you, Steve. That's a brilliant tip. Nita.
So I can only go on my own experience. I decided to go back to university as an adult, and I had 2 children. And I was a parent, a single parent, and I decided to go and do a degree, as you do. And what Mike said earlier on, I did a degree in ancient history and archaeology, which had absolutely nothing to do with the roles I've ever done in my life. But the idea was I was going to go into teaching. And so I was really out of my comfort zone. I was one of the mature students. There wasn't very many mature students on my degree. It was a subject that was extremely new to me. I'd never studied history other than at school, which was quite so many years ago, and I won't tell you the age. And so it was really a challenge for me, but I embraced it. I as Steve said, when I was struggling, I made friends, I talked to people. As hard as I found it going to young people and think, oh, I don't have much in common with them. What am I going to talk about? I've got 2 children. Actually, they were the most nicest and supportive young people that really helped me get through my degree. So it was having a great circle of people around you. And as Steve said, talk to everybody, just talk, verbalize it. Don't sit there, don't think, oh my God, I'm the only one struggling with this, because you probably find there's about 20, 30, 40 other people struggling with the same sort of struggles. Join societies, join some groups, you know, there's lots of groups within the universities and colleges and schools. Go and join some groups where you can find like-minded people with the same sort of struggles, and you'll be able to share ideas and feel a little bit supported. And in my first year, I did struggle. I didn't speak to anybody, didn't talk to anyone. I just thought, oh, this is it. I've got the opportunity. I need to just carry on. And I really struggled unnecessarily. But by the end of the first year, and I reached out and spoke and met some great people, the following years were absolutely brilliant, and I thoroughly enjoyed my degree. And yes, I haven't used, you know, any of the ancient history. I've gone into HR, I've gone into learning and development and talent acquisition, which has nothing to do with history, but it was the skills that I learned from my degree that is what I applied. I also brought my skills that I learned from life to my degree as well, of how to manage, such as that time management piece, such as that having to manage 2 children, a house and everything else. So you gain so many skills to what you're going to apply. So you bring your own, you know, your approach to it, but it's also what you take from whatever setting, education you're in, how you can apply that to your working life as well. And as Mike said earlier on, you know, when we're at school or at work or at college, we have to be slightly different, but not completely change our personality and be that whole new different person. But you do have to adapt to who you are when you're at home with your friends and family and everybody else. So it's finding that balance. And if, as Mike pointed out earlier on, if you're finding that you are changing like your whole personality and yourself for a role, it's probably not the right role for you. If you're having to change yourself completely, adaptation is what you need to find the balance of. So I would say, agree what both said, speak up, talk, get yourself societies into groups and speak more about some of the challenges.
Thank you, Nita. Great advice. And Mike, over to you fairly quickly because we're running out of time.
I'll keep it to sort of 2 minutes if that's okay. So I don't know if it's clear from the description of what I've done, but essentially I've had 3 completely different specialisms in my career. I've done 3 things where there is a little bit of knowledge overlap, but actually they required relearning essentially to some degree and coming into something afresh. There is something, and all the panelists have just touched on it in different ways, but professionally, I make a point of saying, I don't understand that in the room very often where I do not sit silently. I put my hand up and I say, often, my new role often involves interacting with directors, heads of business areas, some quite senior people. And I'm sorry, I don't get what that means. Could you just put it in really simple terms for me? And that's part of that imposter syndrome piece there about the only way you will build that confidence is by asking questions and making it clear that you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. And that's what I would emphasize, that set the expectation with the people that you surround yourself with professionally, personally, that actually, you know, I know lots about this thing, but I don't have all the answers over here, and just be honest about that. And that's how you will learn, and you will start to defeat that imposter syndrome over time. I'll come on it perhaps in a very quick anecdote. So my partner is a research scientist, a very highly qualified one. She has, let me get this right, 2 degrees, 2 masters and a PhD. She's probably one of the top people in her field now nationally, and still suffers with imposter syndrome, still has that self-doubt. Oh my God, they're going to find out that I don't know something on this particular thing. And it's usually very small things that she may not know the specific answer to one micro specific question over here that she might get asked. So even when you become very, very specialist and really know your field, you may still get those feelings. That's okay. It's again about being honest about what you do and don't know, and actually asking questions to inform learning those answers.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Mike, and a really good point that it doesn't go away by more qualifications. it doesn't necessarily go away. I think we can learn to manage our imposter and live with our imposter and not let them make all the decisions, but it doesn't necessarily go away. We're out of time now. Students can move across to the Support Hub chat room, and I'm not sure if you are all able to go across to answer any questions over there, but I'm sure some of us will do. So if anyone wants to ask any questions to Nita, Mike, Steve, or myself, then please go across to the Support Hub chat room and we will join you there shortly. Thank you so much to everyone on the panel and to everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thank you.